You've seen so many crises in your days before, financialcrisis.com, et cetera, et cetera. How does this moment in time compare to those?
Over the last 2 weeks, Jaime Dimon has issued a rather bold warning. The man who steered JP Morgan through the GFC and COVID crises recently released his annual letter to shareholders, and in it, he spoke through reasons why he believes we're now facing the most dangerous economic moment since World War II, and that the end result could very well be a US recession.
We face the most perilous and complicated geopolitical and economic environment since World War II.
Do you personally expect a recession?
Probably that's a likely outcome.
In the letter, Jaime discussed a lot of hot topics: the geopolitical state of the world, the large deficits seen in the United States, sticky inflation and the risk of higher interest rates, and the new trade war that threatens America's place in the global economic system. Now, I get it, Jaime Dimon cops a lot of criticism, naturally, for being the world's top banker, and you all know the collective noun for bankers, but I do think he has a really unique perspective thanks to his position at JP Morgan, and is definitely someone worth listening to. I mean, he doesn't have to volunteer a 59-page shareholder letter, right? And actually, after the release of this letter, he sat down for a 30-minute interview with Fox Business, where he really fleshed out a lot of these pressing topics, particularly his thoughts as to America's current position in the global economy.
We have a huge, complex geopolitical situation, huge fiscal deficits, not just here, but around the world, sticky inflation, which I personally think will not go away so quick. And then you have, what's going to happen to tariffs, what's going to happen to trade.
The list is rather extensive, and the first big topic Jaime spoke about was, of course, Trump's tariffs. As we know, Trump recently put the tariff plan on a 90-day pause, that being a pause on all foreign nations except China. In fact, the China trade sparring has since intensified into a full-on trade war, with both nations raising tariffs on one another, and China even going so far as to call Trump's trade policies a joke in the history of economics. I'm not kidding, they called America a joke. And the crazy thing is, I think Jaime kind of agrees.
So what do you think about the tariff plan?
It's totally reasonable to say we want to make trade better. But I also want to point out to the Americans, we have the best economy in the world. Our GDP per person is $85,000. China's is $15,000. So you got to put a little bit in the context. But, and then, of course, when they put the tariffs in, it was way beyond what people expected. That will cause a little inflation, slow down growth. But I hope what they really do is let Scott Bessent, who I think is a professional, get those things done quickly. If you want to calm down the markets, show progress in those things, and let Scott take the time. Trade deals are very large and very complex. They can't be done overnight, but you really have to have teams working them to get them right.
For those that don't know, Scott Bessent is the US Treasury Secretary, the person responsible for managing the federal government's finances. But I want to unpack what Jaime Dimon was really saying in that clip. He said it's reasonable to say you want to make trade better, but you've got to remember the context. America has the strongest economy in the world. This ties back to that common narrative that the US is being ripped off on trade. Jaime's point is simple. Yes, we want fairer trade, but let's not pretend that America is the victim here. The US is the wealthiest nation on the planet. Of course Americans are going to buy more from poorer countries than those poorer countries buy from expensive America. That's to be expected. And instead of using blunt force tools like across-the-board tariffs, Jaime argues the US should take a smarter, more targeted approach, understanding each trade imbalance individually and negotiating case by case, not applying the same formula to every single country. As Howard Marks said recently, the big problem with widespread tariffs that are just lopped on all countries is that it pushes trade partners away. It pushes allies away. For example, there was a really interesting clip talking about my home country, Australia, being tariffed that did the rounds on social media lately. You'll get what I mean.
Answer the question on Australia. We have a trade surplus with Australia. We have a free trade agreement. Why? They are an incredibly important national security partner. Why were they whacked with a tariff?
Senator, despite the agreement, they ban our beef, they ban our pork, they're getting ready to impose measures on our digital companies.
With your Greek letter formula, the fact that we have a trade surplus.
We're trying to address the $1.2 trillion deficit that Biden left us with.
I think that answer, sir, you're a much smarter person than that answer.
And this is kind of Jaime's point as well. As he'll talk about in this next clip, his opinion is that instead of pushing allies and trade partners away, the US should look to strengthen relationships and to boost trade, especially when the US is already quite reliant on trade with adversaries like China. Rare earth elements, pharmaceutical ingredients, electronics, machinery, industrial parts, they all come from China.
It sounds like you're taking a calm head in the face of all of this.
Yeah, I'm taking a calm view, but I think it could get worse if we don't make some progress here. And of course, trade wars, you saw China raise the rates today, and people are going to get angry and they're going to have responses. But a very important point, China and Russia have made it clear they want to kind of dismantle the post-World War II system. And I think the goal of all this trade stuff should be to make Europe and our trading partners, Japan, Korea, Philippines, stronger, not weaker, bring them closer as we build up our military. And any trade that protects military, that we should definitely do. I mean, we made a lot of mistakes about, as you know, pharmaceuticals, shipping, pharmaceutical ingredients, penicillin.
That we're so reliant on China for all of this stuff.
We can't rely on any potential adversary for things we need for our military. And so, there I'm quite sympathetic. That we should do, that's absolutely paramount.
This is something Jaime spoke about in his shareholder letter too. China and Russia are openly challenging the American-led world through military moves, economic influence, and of course, trade realignment. So in Jaime's eyes, America needs to stop relying on China for goods critical to national defense. I mean, between 2020 and 2023, about 74% of rare earth elements imported into the US came from China. How crazy is that? This is a group of 17 chemically similar metals that are used in EVs, wind turbines, smartphones, laptops, fighter jets, guided missiles, MRI machines, radar, lasers, the list goes on. So Jaime's thoughts are that if a product is needed for the US military, it should either be produced domestically or sourced from reliable allies. But this means instead of isolating or undermining trade with friends, the US should probably pull them closer. Instead of tariffs, perhaps the US should consider mutually beneficial trade, tighter military alliances, and economic cooperation. Because if they don't, you're giving the rising power an in, and they will definitely take it.
You got to separate, making sneakers from making guns. One is like really important. One is, it's not as big a deal. You need to keep the economic alliance together. I think it would be in Russia's and North Korea's, Iran's, and China's interest to fragment the Western world. And I think that would be the biggest long-term mistake. And I'm talking about over 30 or 40 years. I don't want to read the book about how the West was lost.
That's Jaime's overarching viewpoint, and it's also important that trade gets handled more thoughtfully because of the short-term consequences too. Trade policy has long-term geopolitical consequences, as Jaime discussed, but it also has negative short-term effects too. In the short term, American consumers lose out. Tariffs are inflationary, and it only makes the cost of living crisis worse. This was another key point Jaime raised in his shareholder letter. He noted, whatever you think of the legitimate reasons for the newly announced tariffs, and of course there are some, or the long-term effect, good or bad, there are likely to be short-term effects. As for the short term, we are likely to see inflationary outcomes not only on imported goods, but on domestic prices as input costs rise and demand increases on domestic products. How this plays out on different products will partially depend on their substitutability and price elasticity. Whether or not the menu of tariffs causes a recession remains in question, but it will slow down growth. And that's the last thing Jaime really delved into in this Fox Business interview, whether this all culminates in a recession for the United States.
Is there anything you can tell us about the environment right now in terms of loan demand, in terms of defaults? Because while all of this is happening, you've got, for example, your economics team predicting a recession this year.
We've been in this kind of very soft landing for a long time. Consumers have money, they were spending money, corporate is making profits. I do remind people part of that was because of our extraordinary fiscal spending. We borrowed and spent $11 trillion since COVID. And that obviously drives a lot of growth, it drives corporate profits. So I think what we're going to see now is corporations making announcement after announcement about, don't expect my guidance to be true, I'm going to hold back here a little bit. These are long-term decisions they have to make. They may want to see the tax bill, which hopefully they can get done in July. So yeah, I think you're going to see a slowdown. I think the economists are probably right to say that you should expect that.
Well, how significant a slowdown? I mean, are you seeing defaults?
Not yet, but I expect them. And the other thing, which we haven't had any slowdown or real recession, and COVID was so short, I almost don't include it, and so long that if you have rates going up a little bit, and inflation is sticky, and credit spreads are gapping out, which they're going to, I think you'll see more credit problems than people have seen in a long time.
Now, there was a lot of finance jargon in that clip, but what Jaime is saying is essentially three things. One, from his position as the CEO of America's largest bank, he is already seeing recessionary sentiment in CEO behavior. They're hitting the brakes on spending, hiring, and investment, and that's how slowdowns start. Then two, he thinks that this is to be expected, reminding us that recent growth and profits weren't all organic. They were supercharged by literally trillions in government stimulus, which is now fading. But then three, he's not currently seeing companies that bank with JP Morgan running into issues repaying their loans. However, he does expect that to happen in the near future. Essentially, his justification is we've gone so long without a proper credit cycle that if interest rates stay high because inflation doesn't fade, what we were talking about before, then riskier borrowers are likely going to crack. They won't be able to make their loan repayments and defaults will rise. And that is a credit crunch, a situation where it suddenly becomes harder or more expensive to borrow money and people or businesses can't keep up. So that's what Jaime sees happening from his position as head of JP Morgan. And that's why he believes that there are storm clouds on the horizon.
It's amazing to me that these companies, they just get too lax in what they do, and we got a little bit of that too. So going back to killing bureaucracy, we put some headcount controls in place, not because we're not doing well. I call it just like going for your run and eating your spinach.
But how significant would you expect that? Do you personally expect a recession?
I am going to defer to my economists at this point, but I think probably that's a likely outcome. But I do think fixing these tariff issues and trade issues would be a good thing to do. That will get one major uncertainty behind us. We have the strongest economy in the world. It would be good not to add to the uncertainty out there.
And they're the reasons why Jaime Dimon wrote in his annual letter that he believes America, and indeed the world, is at a crossroads. The world is naturally shifting. COVID was an economic accelerant to that. The BRICS nations are now closer and stronger than ever. And if the Western world starts essentially falling out, particularly around trade, it really sets the stage for, as Ray Dalio would say, the rising power to challenge the existing power.
Don't let this go on too long because it's causing cumulative damage, including huge anger at the United States. Like I said, if my goal would be keep the allies together, get them together, keep work on that, and you fix the trade, whether it's unfair trade, fix it, and then, pull them closer and keep the Western world together.
So they are Jaime Dimon's views on the current state of the world. If you're interested, a lot more detail can be found in his annual shareholder letter, which I'll leave linked in the description. But please leave a like on this video if you did enjoy it, and subscribe if you made it all the way to the end. But with that said, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.